The first thing you should know about Millhaven Library is that it breathes. Not in the way living things do, with lungs and oxygen, but in the way old buildings settle into their foundations. Creaking wooden floors that rise slightly in summer humidity, narrow windows that whistle when October winds blow in from the lake, and shelves that seem to exhale dust no matter how often I clean them. I've been the head librarian here for 11 years, ever since my divorce from Dan when I was 27, and still believing I might write something worth shelving someday. Now, at 38, I've come to accept that my relationship with books will always be as their caretaker rather than their creator. There are worse fates. The library has been good to me, wrapping around my solitary existence like a cocoon. Morning, Mrs. Marsh, calls Trevor, the 17-year-old who helps shelve books after school. He's the only one who still uses my married name, despite my gentle corrections. Good morning, Trevor, and it's Ms. Eleanor, remember? Or just Ellie. I smile, unlocking the circulation desk while balancing a cardboard cup of coffee from Hank's diner. Sorry, Miss Eleanor, he mumbles, already heading toward the cart of returns. Millhaven's library isn't large, just a converted Victorian house with 3 floors, donated by the Caldwell family in 1902. The main floor holds fiction and the circulation desk. The second floor houses nonfiction, local history, and my small office. The basement contains archives, storage, and a children's reading nook that I painted myself, with stars that glow in the dark during story hour. My day follows the usual rhythm, helping Mrs. Donovan find large print mysteries, assisting Professor Whitaker with research for his never-finished local history book, showing a young mother how to access our digital catalog. By mid-afternoon, the library is quiet enough that I can focus on processing the stack of donations that arrived yesterday. Most donation boxes contain the expected: dog-eared paperbacks, outdated reference books, the occasional first edition that makes my heart skip. This particular box, left anonymously at our back door, holds mostly unremarkable philosophy texts from the 1970s and a few water-damaged romance novels. But at the bottom, wrapped in what appears to be an old silk handkerchief, lies something different. The book is bound in dark leather that feels unnaturally warm beneath my fingers. No title marks its spine or cover. No library stamps, no bookplate. No barcode, nothing to indicate it had ever been cataloged or owned. The binding looks ancient, yet the leather isn't cracked or worn as it should be. I run my fingers along its spine, feeling a strange vibration, like a purr, beneath my touch. When I open it, the scent is not of mildew or aged paper, but something sharper: ink, fresh and metallic. Most of the pages are blank, cream-colored and thick, but the first few pages contain handwritten text in elegant, slanted script I don't recognize. The text describes exactly what I'm doing at this exact moment: finding the book on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the shadows in Millhaven Library grow long across the hardwood floors. How my fingers trembled slightly as I unwrapped the dark leather binding from its silk cocoon. That I did not yet understand what I held. I snapped the book shut, my heart suddenly racing. The first line describes exactly what I'm doing at this exact moment. Even the detail about my hands trembling, which they are now, is correct. Everything okay, Ms. Eleanor? Trevor calls from between the stacks. Yes, I answer too quickly, tucking the book under my arm. Just found something interesting. According to protocol, I should catalog this book, assign it a place in our collection. Instead, I slide it into my personal tote bag. A small theft that doesn't feel like theft at all, but like following an instruction that hasn't yet been spoken. Later, as I turn out the library lights and lock the front door, I feel the book's weight in my bag, pressing against my hip like a secret. The evening air carries the scent of wood smoke and approaching rain. Behind me, I swear I hear the library sigh. My cottage sits at the edge of Copper Lake, a 10-minute walk from the library. It's small, just big enough for me, my books, and the ghosts of plans that died when Dan left. Tonight, its familiar silhouette against the darkening sky offers no comfort. The book in my bag feels heavier with each step, as if gaining mass from the falling night. Once inside, I pour a glass of wine I don't really want and place the book on my kitchen table. For nearly an hour, I orbit it like a cautious satellite, washing dishes, sorting mail, anything to delay opening it again. Eventually, I sit down, pull the leather binding toward me, and turn to where I left off. More text has appeared. It describes exactly what I'm doing now: how I took the book home, though I knew I shouldn't, how I placed it on my kitchen table and circled it like prey, sipping Cabernet from the bottle I'd opened 3 nights ago. How, as the clock ticked past 9, I finally surrendered to curiosity. I jerk back, wine sloshing over the rim of my glass. The book is describing exactly what I'm doing, down to the detail about the wine being opened 3 days ago. I hadn't remembered that myself until reading it. I flip through the subsequent pages, finding most still blank. But there's more text further in, as if sections of a story are being written out of sequence. I read fragments describing a library event that hasn't happened yet, scheduled for next week. Details about conversations with patrons I haven't had. The accuracy is unnerving. My rational mind searches for explanations. Someone is playing an elaborate prank. I've received the personal journal of someone with remarkable insight. I'm hallucinating from stress or an undiagnosed condition. None of these explanations satisfy. I carry the book to bed with me, placing it on my nightstand. Sleep comes fitfully, punctuated by dreams of ink flowing like black blood across white pages, forming words that whisper themselves into my ear. In the dream, I'm writing in the book, my hand moving across the page with a will of its own. I wake at 3:17 a.m., mouth dry, heart hammering. The book lies open beside me, though I'm certain I closed it. In the dim light from my digital clock, I see new text filling what had been blank pages. The text says that Wednesday will bring Rain and the Keller twins, who will return their books late and lie about it. That I will smile and waive the fine, though inside I'll think of their father, Matthew, and the summer we spent together when I was 16, before he chose Sarah instead. No, I whispered in my empty bedroom. Nobody knows about Matthew Keller. Not even Dan knew how much it hurt when Matt chose Sarah Coleman over me that summer before college. I've never told anyone. In the morning, rain pounds against my windows, though the forecast predicted clear skies. I dress mechanically, unable to shake the feeling of being read rather than being the reader. My hands shake so badly I spill coffee across my blouse and have to change. At the library, the Keller twins arrive at 11:32, exactly as described. Blonde and freckled like their father, they hand me dog-eared copies of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Sorry they're late, Ms. Eleanor, says Abby, the one with the purple backpack. We forgot. I hear myself say, don't worry about it, while waving the fine in the system, exactly as the book predicted. As they leave, I think about their father for the first time in years. During my lunch break, I return to my office and find the book in my bag, though I'm certain I left it at home. When I open it, more text has appeared. It tells me I will receive a call at 3:40 p.m. The caller won't identify himself, but I'll recognize Matt Keller's voice immediately. He'll ask about the twins' reading habits, but we both will know that's not why he's calling. After 22 years, he still thinks about the dock at Copper Lake and the promises made there. I slam the book shut, my breath coming in short gasps. This is impossible. I lock the book in my desk drawer and try to focus on work, but the hours crawl toward 3:40 like a wounded animal. At 3:38, I tell Trevor I'm not taking calls and lock myself in the bathroom. At 3:40 exactly, my cell phone rings, a number I don't recognize. I silence it, hands trembling, and watch as a voicemail notification appears. When I finally listen to it, hours later in the safety of my car, Matt Keller's voice floods the small space. Hey, Ellie, well, you know who it is. Just wondering if the girls are keeping up with their reading. They mentioned you recommended something for them. A pause. Been thinking about the old days, the lake. Anyway, call me if you want. That night, I try to burn the book in my fireplace. It won't catch. I submerge it in the bathtub for hours. The pages remain dry. I drive to the lake and throw it as far as I can into the black water. When I return home, it sits on my kitchen table, open to a new page. The text explains that I would learn the book cannot be destroyed by conventional means. It has chosen me, just as it had chosen others before. The reading has begun, and only when the story concludes can the book be passed on. I understand then that I've invited something terrible into my life, something patient that has all the time in the world to tell its story through me. Days pass, and the book continues its uncanny narration of my life. I've stopped trying to destroy it and instead keep it close, checking obsessively for new text. It's become my terrible companion, the first thing I look at upon waking and the last thing before sleep. Sometimes I catch myself stroking its cover, an unconscious gesture of awful intimacy. The book doesn't just predict events now, it reveals my thoughts before I'm fully aware of them myself. It narrates my growing insomnia, my diminishing appetite, the tremor in my left hand that appears when I'm shelving books in the library's West Wing. One new passage mentions that I find myself drawn to the local history section more frequently, though I cannot articulate why. Perhaps it's the leather-bound town records from 1887, or perhaps it's because I sense I am not the first in Millhaven to host the book. After reading this passage, I find myself in the local history section without remembering climbing the stairs. My fingers trace the spines of ledgers and handwritten accounts of Millhaven's founding, stopping at an unmarked journal from 1887. Inside, in faded ink, I find an account from the original library founder, Elizabeth Caldwell. The book found its way to me last winter. It speaks with my voice but tells truths I have never shared. I fear what it knows. I fear what it wants. The pages fill with my life as it unravels. I slam the journal shut, my heart pounding. Elizabeth Caldwell died in a house fire that would have destroyed the original library had the townspeople not saved most of the books. I'd always considered it a tragic accident. Now I wonder if she'd been trying to burn the book, trying and failing as I had. At home that night, I find a new passage. It says I now wonder about Elizabeth Caldwell's fate, unaware that my own colleague is already affected by the book's expanding influence. Sandra Fisher, the reference librarian, would be the first casualty of this reading. Sandra has worked with me for 5 years, a quiet woman with a passion for medieval literature and a talent for finding obscure information for patrons. The next day at work, I watch her carefully. She seems normal, organizing a display of fall reading recommendations, until I notice her hands. They're stained with ink, black beneath the fingernails, though we've used digital systems for years. Sandra, I say carefully, are you working on a special project? She looks at me with slight confusion. Just some personal research. Old texts. Her eyes are ringed with exhaustion. I've been having strange dreams, Ellie, about words that move when you're not looking directly at them. A chill runs through me. Be careful with whatever you're reading. She gives a small laugh. It's just dreams. Though I did find something interesting about the library founder. Did you know Elizabeth Caldwell kept a journal where she claimed a book was writing her life? Bizarre what isolation does to the mind. Before I can respond, there's a crash from the children's section. By the time we've cleaned up the fallen bookshelf and calmed the startled children, I've lost my chance to warn her. That night, the book writes that Sandra Fisher will drive home at 5:43 p.m., distracted by thoughts of moving words and Elizabeth Caldwell. She won't see the delivery truck run the red light at Maple and 4th. The impact will be instantaneous. Her last thought will be of ink spreading across a page. I call Sandra immediately, my fingers fumbling with the phone. No answer. I call again and again. At 5:50, I receive a call from Trevor, his voice high and breaking. Ms. Eleanor, there's been an accident. Sandra, they're saying she didn't make it. I sink to my kitchen floor, the phone slipping from my grasp. The book lies open on the table above me, and new words form across the page. I finally understand the book's power is not merely predictive. It is creative. What it writes comes to be. And it is writing faster now, the ink flowing like blood from an open wound. In the days that follow, I notice other changes. Patrons enter the library and stop mid-sentence as if forgetting why they've come. Trevor shelves books in perfect alphabetical order one day, then by color the next, insisting that's the system we've always used. Mrs. Donovan, who has borrowed the same Agatha Christie novel every month for years, returns it unread, claiming the words rearranged themselves when she wasn't looking. The book's narrative accelerates, pages filling faster than I can read them. It tells me about the subtle shifting of reality around me, the library's back staircase that now has 13 steps instead of 12, the reflection in the third floor bathroom mirror that blinks a half second after I do, the growing silence of birds around my cottage. What I don't yet know, it tells me, is that the book has been passed through 7 readers in Millhaven's history. None lived to see their story's conclusion. But my reading will be different. My reading will free what lies between the words. I find myself standing outside Matt Keller's house at midnight with no memory of driving there. The book is clutched to my chest and I'm wearing a dress I haven't worn since my divorce. When Matt answers the door, surprise turning to concern on his face, I hear myself speak words I don't recognize as my own. It's writing us into a corner, Matt. It's writing us all. Ellie, you're scaring me. Matt's voice seems to come from far away as he guides me into his house. His hand on my elbow feels like the only real thing in a world growing increasingly insubstantial. What's writing us? What are you talking about? The twins are at their mother's, he explains, and I'm relieved. The book is unpredictable around children. Their pages seem to fill differently, with drawings instead of words, spiraling patterns that hurt my eyes. This, I whisper, holding up the leather-bound volume. It knows things, Matt. It knew about us. About that summer. It knew about Sandra's accident before it happened. Matt's kitchen is warm and lived in, nothing like the sterile modernity of the house he once shared with Sarah. He makes tea I don't drink and sits across from me, eyes wary but kind. May I? He asks, reaching for the book. I hesitate, then slide it across the table. As his fingers touch the cover, the lights flicker. Just a power surge, I tell myself, though I know better. Matt opens to the first page and frowns. Ellie, there's nothing here. What? I grab the book back. The pages are filled with dense script, just as they've been for weeks. You can't see it? See what? He runs a hand through his hair, now flecked with gray at the temples. The pages are blank. Understanding washes over me like ice water. It only reveals itself to its chosen reader, I murmur, the realization settling in my bones. It's mine to read, mine alone. Back home, exhausted and humiliated by my midnight visit to Matt, I curl on my sofa with the book open in my lap. New text has appeared, but different from the usual narration. Older, like a historical account. It explains that the book has existed for centuries, passing from reader to reader when each narrative concludes. It began as a monk's empty journal in the 14th century Spain, until the monk, starving during a long winter, cut his finger while turning a page. The first drop of blood awakened the entity that dwells between words. The entity has no name we can pronounce. It exists in the space between what is written and what is read. It feeds on the most potent human emotions: fear, grief, longing, shame. Each reader's story nourishes it, strengthening its grip on our world. Previous readers have tried to escape their narratives, some by destroying the book, impossible, others by refusing to read further. The words find other ways to be seen. Still others by taking their own lives. The narrative simply continues with their absence noted. The last reader in Millhaven was Christopher Marsh, who believed burning down his home with the book inside would end its influence. He did not survive. The book did. I drop it as if burned. Christopher Marsh, my grandfather, who died in a house fire when I was 10. The grandfather who read to me every night, who nurtured my love of books, who left me his collection of first editions that I keep in a glass case in my bedroom. The case that now, I realize with dawning horror, sits empty. The next passage appears as I watch. I now understand why I've been chosen. The book had been intended for my bloodline. It had waited patiently for decades, moving through other readers until a Marsh held it once more. I also realize why the book's influence has expanded beyond me, affecting the library patrons, Trevor, even Matt Keller. The entity is growing stronger, stretching beyond the confines of its pages. Soon, it would no longer need a reader at all. My hands shake as I flip through the pages, finding scattered fragments of future text. A passage describes the library's transformation, its interior geometry shifting when no one is looking. Another tells of Trevor finding a hidden door in the archive room, leading to a spiral staircase that wasn't there before. Most disturbing is a passage dated 3 days from now. The entity finally manifests in physical form, drawn from the ink and memories absorbed from generations of readers. It takes shape in the shadows of the library's main reading room, using the collective fears of everyone present. Only I recognize it for what it is, but by then, its hunger has grown too vast to be contained by mere pages. I slam the book shut and pace my small living room. If I'm trapped in this narrative, I need to understand the rules. The book has shown me that it can affect reality, not just predict it. Its power is expanding. If I can somehow change the course of the story, a new determination takes hold. I may not be able to destroy the book, but perhaps I can write my own ending. I drive to the university in the neighboring town, where Professor Whitaker has his office. The old man is a folklore specialist who has been researching Millhaven history for decades. If anyone might know something about the book, it would be him. His office smells of pipe tobacco and old paper. Books line every wall, stacked on the floor in precarious towers. I've brought the leather volume with me, unwilling to let it out of my sight. Eleanor, what brings you here at this hour? Whitaker peers at me over half-moon glasses. I place the book on his cluttered desk. Can you see anything written in this? He adjusts his glasses and opens it carefully. Fascinating binding, pre-industrial techniques. He flips through the pages. But no, it appears blank. Why? I sink into the chair across from him. I need to know about cursed books. Books that write themselves. Whitaker's expression shifts from confusion to academic interest. Like the Liber Ostium, the Book of Doors, or perhaps the Chronicon Perpetua. I don't know what it's called, but it's killed people in Millhaven, including my grandfather. The professor's face grows serious. Show me exactly what you see in those pages, Eleanor. For the next hour, I dictate passages from the book, while Whitaker takes furious notes. When I reach the part about the entity between words, he stops me. The liminalist, he says softly. That's what the 16th century accounts called it. An entity that exists in the liminal space between text and meaning, between author and reader. He removes his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. There are reports throughout history of books that absorb their readers' lives. Most were dismissed as superstition. How do I stop it? Whitaker avoids my gaze. The accounts vary. Some suggest completing the narrative is the only release, allowing the book to pass to another reader. Others claim the entity can be trapped by writing a closed loop in the text, an endless recursion that contains it. And if the entity is breaking free of the book, then God help us all. As I leave his office, new text appears in the book. I had sought knowledge, but knowledge alone would not save me. The entity had tasted my fear now, the particular terror of a librarian who discovers that books can read back. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. The library would become the battleground where narratives collided. I would face what lived between the words, or I would become another story lost between the pages. Morning arrives with an unnatural stillness. No birds sing outside my window. No breeze disturbs the surface of Copper Lake. When I step outside, the air feels dense, as if reality itself has thickened overnight. The book weighs heavily in my bag as I walk to the library. Its presence thrums against my hip, vibrating with anticipation. Today's chapter is already written. I simply haven't read it yet. As I approach the library, I notice subtle wrongness. The Victorian architecture seems exaggerated. The spire slightly too tall, the windows narrower, the front door darker and more imposing than I remember. Trevor stands on the steps waiting for me with unusual stillness. Good morning, I call, my voice unnaturally loud in the quiet street. He turns, his movements slightly delayed, like a video with poor synchronization. Morning, Mrs. Marsh. His eyes are vacant, pupils expanded despite the bright sunlight. The returns are shelved. The new shipment arrived. The children are waiting in the basement. What children? It's not story hour today. Trevor blinks slowly. The children have always been in the basement, Mrs. Marsh. They're waiting for the story to end. My skin prickles with gooseflesh. Trevor has never called me Mrs. Marsh twice in a row, and there is no children's event scheduled today. As I unlock the front door, I whisper, "What's happening to you?" "Words," he replies simply. I'm becoming words on a page. Inside, the library's dimensions seem distorted. The main reading room stretches longer than physically possible, the ceiling higher. Shadows pool in corners where there shouldn't be corners. The smell of old books is overpowering, tinged with something metallic, ink or blood. I retreat to my office, locking the door behind me. With trembling hands, I open the book to today's passage. The library had become a labyrinth of text and subtext, its architecture reflecting the entity's growing influence. I recognized that the physical building was merging with the narrative space of the book. Soon, the distinction between reading about an event and experiencing it would dissolve completely. From the shadows of the local history section would emerge a figure I'd glimpsed only in fragments, a silhouette assembled from ink and memory, wearing the face of every character who had shaped my story. The sound of footsteps outside my office door makes me freeze. Heavy, deliberate steps that pause just outside. Ellie. The voice is Dan's, though I know my ex-husband is 2,000 miles away in Seattle. Let me in, Ellie. We need to talk about what happened. I press my hands against my mouth to stop from answering. It's not Dan. It's the entity using my memories, my old pain. You know what really happened. The voice shifts, becoming my father's. You know why I left, why everyone leaves. The doorknob rattles. It wasn't the drinking, Ellie. It was you, always you. Tears streak my face as I back away from the door. You're not real, I whisper. I'm the only real thing left. The voice changes again, becoming a chorus of every significant person in my life. I'm the story you've been telling yourself your whole life, the narrative you hide inside. The door splinters inward, though no physical force could have caused it. In the doorway stands nothing definite. A figure composed of shifting shadows and fragments of faces I recognize. Dan, my father, Matt Keller, even Sandra's frightened eyes. Ink drips from its edges like black tears, sizzling where it hits the floor. You've been a satisfying reader, Eleanor, it says in a voice like pages turning. Your fear has texture. Your grief has depth. Your loneliness, it makes a sound like smacking lips. Exquisite. The Marsh bloodline has always produced the finest readers. I back against the window, clutching the book to my chest. My grandfather, you took him. The entity ripples, momentarily assuming Christopher Marsh's kind, weathered face. He tried to burn me. Fire cannot harm what exists between states of matter. It steps forward, trailing inky footprints. But you won't make his mistake. You'll complete the reading. And if I refuse? It gestures toward the window. Outside, Millhaven has changed. The streets are empty. Buildings warp and twist like reflections in dark water. Your world is already becoming text. Reality requires consensus, Eleanor. When enough minds accept a narrative, it becomes truth. Understanding blooms, terrible and cold. You're rewriting Millhaven. I'm rewriting everything, one reader at a time. It extends a hand that isn't quite a hand, more a suggestion of fingers formed from shadow and ink. The final chapter awaits. Your grandfather never reached it. Your story could be different. In that moment, I see the pattern. The entity offers hope, the possibility of a different outcome, to keep its readers engaged until the end, until it has consumed everything they are. I think of Professor Whitaker's words. A closed loop might trap the entity, an endless recursion within the text. I need to read the ending first, I say, backing toward my desk, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to know how my story concludes. The shadow figure tilts what might be its head. That's not how stories work, librarian. You know this. I've spent my life surrounded by endings, I counter. Let me see mine before I turn the final pages. It considers, then nods. Read the last page, then. It makes no difference now. With shaking hands, I turn to the end of the book, where text fills what had been blank pages. As I read the final words, I understood too late that my consciousness was already merging with the books. The entity would wear my memories like a skin, using them to lure the next reader. I had become just another layer of narrative, my existence reduced to ink on a page. The book would find its next reader. It always did. Horror floods me as I realize the trap I've fallen into. The book has already written my defeat. My hands move without conscious direction, flipping back through the pages to where today's narrative continues. Faced with my inevitable consumption, I made one final, desperate attempt to change the ending that had already been written. As I read these words, I know what I must do. The entity is right. I can't burn the book or destroy it conventionally, but I might be able to corrupt its narrative from within. I grab a pen from my desk and, before the entity can react, begin writing in the margins of the book. Not a new ending, but notes that contradict the main text, creating paradoxes and logical impossibilities. The entity existed only as fiction, I write. I recognized that I had been hallucinating due to carbon monoxide poisoning from my faulty furnace. The shadow figure shrieks, its form rippling violently. What are you doing? I continue writing frantically. The book was ordinary, its mysteries imagined. I closed it and returned to my normal life, the narrative loop broken by recognition of its fictional nature. Stop! The entity roars, lunging forward. But I've created enough contradictions to make it hesitate, its form flickering between solidity and vapor. I seize my chance and race past it, down the distorted hallway toward the main reading room. The library has transformed completely now. Shelves curve impossibly, floors tilt at nauseating angles, books flutter from their places like startled birds, pages riffling as if read by invisible fingers. The entity pursues me, its form shifting between shadow and substance, between ink and memory. I reach the main reading room to find it transformed into a vast cathedral of books. The ceiling has disappeared, replaced by a spiraling void of floating text. Shelves extend upward infinitely, books shuffling themselves in patterns too complex to comprehend. And everywhere, on every surface, words crawl like insects, excerpts from every book ever housed in Millhaven Library. You cannot escape a story once you're written into it. The entity's voice surrounds me, coming from everywhere and nowhere. It no longer bothers with a single form, instead, manifesting as dozens of partial figures, ghostly readers from throughout history, each holding an identical leather-bound book. Among them, I recognize Elizabeth Caldwell in her Victorian dress, my grandfather in his cardigan and reading glasses. Others I don't know. A Spanish monk with hollow cheeks, a woman in 1950s clothing, a teenage boy with sad eyes. All previous readers, all consumed. Your resistance is merely another plot point, the entity continues as the spectral readers close in around me. The rebellious protagonist, the final stand. I've consumed it countless times. The book in my hands pulses like a heart, its pages flipping rapidly of their own accord. New text appears faster than I can process. I found myself surrounded by the ghosts of previous readers, their experiences feeding the entity that had claimed them. I realized I was just another chapter in an endless book. No, I whisper, then louder. No! With a surge of desperate inspiration, I reach into my pocket for my grandfather's fountain pen, the one possession of his I've carried every day since his death. I uncap it and, before I can second guess myself, slice my palm with its sharp metal nib. Blood wells immediately, bright and shocking against my skin. The entity shrieks as I press my bleeding hand against the book's pages. What are you doing? Its voice splinters into dozens, the chorus of trapped readers suddenly agitated. Changing the story, I gasp, watching as my blood soaks into the cream-colored paper, staining the precise black text with messy crimson reality. With the only thing that's still real. The fountains of narrative theory I've studied over years as a librarian come back to me. Stories require structure. They need beginning, middle, end. They demand internal logic and narrative consistency. What they cannot accommodate is chaos, true randomness, the intrusion of an element that follows no rules of storytelling. As my blood spreads across the pages, I begin writing with my grandfather's pen, Not in the margins this time, but directly over the entity's text. Not a counter narrative, but anti narrative. Stream of consciousness. Disconnected images. Memories with no cause and effect. Dreams without symbolism. The purple bicycle never learned to sing. Though Tuesday came anyway, the clouds taste like grandfather's tobacco pipe, 17 butterflies equal one broken promise. No story ever told itself back to front. Words cannot contain what exists between heartbeats. The entity howls, its many forms flickering violently. The ghostly readers begin to disintegrate, their expressions shifting from menace to something like hope. What have you done? The entity's voice fractures, no longer harmonious but discordant, confused. The library shudders around us. Books fall from their shelves in cascades. The impossible architecture begins to collapse, folding in on itself like origami in reverse. I've corrupted your narrative coherence, I say, continuing to write nonsensical phrases in my blood. Stories need structure. Even horror stories. Especially horror stories. Without it, you have no power. The entity lunges for me one final time, its form now barely holding together, a smear of ink and shadow with too many limbs, too many faces. Your blood, it hisses. Marsh blood. It binds me, but it can also... I feel a violent tug, as if something is trying to pull me inside out. The book grows hot in my hands, then blindingly bright. The entity's form collapses inward like a black hole, dragging fragments of the library with it. With horror, I realize it's dragging me too. Into the pages, into the space between words where it has lived for centuries. No! I scream, but my voice is sucked away. The last thing I see is my blood-covered hand disappearing into blinding light as the world dissolves around me. Then nothing. Absolute nothing. I float in a void of perfect whiteness like an empty page. No sound, no sensation, only awareness. Is this death? Or something worse? Existence reduced to pure consciousness without body or voice? Gradually, I become aware of shapes in the emptiness. Letters. Words. Pages upon pages of text stretching infinitely in all directions. I'm inside the book, inside all books, inside the space between meaning and language. And I'm not alone. They're here with me. Elizabeth Caldwell, my grandfather, the monk, all the previous readers. Not as the ghosts the entity manifested, but as pure narrative consciousness. They surround me like a chorus of whispers. You've changed the story, my grandfather's presence says. You've broken the cycle. How? I try to ask, though I have no voice here. Blood and chaos, Elizabeth's presence answers. The entity feeds on structured fear, on narrative dread. You gave it randomness it couldn't process. But I'm trapped here now, too, I realize. Not necessarily, blah, my grandfather replies. The book is weakened. Its hold on reality has slipped. There's a way out, but a cost. I understand without being told. Someone must remain to keep the entity contained. Someone must become the new binding. I'll stay, I tell them, feeling their collective relief. But first, help me write one last chapter. A true ending. Together, we focus our narrative consciousness on the final pages of the book. I feel the entity struggling against us, but it's diminished now, no longer the overwhelming force it once was. With our combined will, we compose the true conclusion to this story. Trevor finds me unconscious on the floor of the reading room, the leather-bound book clutched to my chest. The library is normal again. No impossible architecture, no swirling voids of text. Just quiet shelves and dust motes dancing in morning light. I wake in the hospital with Matt Keller at my bedside, concern etched on his face. You've been out for 3 days, he tells me, squeezing my hand. Carbon monoxide leak at the library. Could have killed everyone if Trevor hadn't found you and called for help. A convenient explanation, constructed for a world that needs logic, that rejects the impossible. I accept it without argument. The book, I whisper, my voice hoarse. Where is it? What book? Matt asks, but I see the flicker in his eyes. He knows something. When I'm released a day later, I return to the library. It's closed for repairs, yellow caution tape across the entrance. I use my key anyway, slipping inside to find the main reading room exactly as it should be. No trace remains of what really happened, except in my memory. And in the book, which sits on the circulation desk waiting for me, it looks different now. The leather binding's still dark, but the cover now embossed with a title that wasn't there before. The Binding. When I open it, most pages are blank again, except for a short inscription on the first page in elegant script that I recognize as my own handwriting, though I have no memory of writing it. For those who read between the lines, some stories are meant to end, some are meant to bind. Eleanor Marsh contained what lived between words, becoming both librarian and library. She exists now in every book you open, in every word you read. The entity sleeps, wrapped in her consciousness like a straitjacket woven from chaos and blood. This book is a warning and a remembrance. Do not attempt to read beyond this page. Do not seek what hides in the spaces between letters. Above all, do not bleed onto these pages. Some doors once opened can never truly close again. I close the book, understanding what has happened. Part of me remains trapped inside, containing the entity like a prison guard. This physical form, this Eleanor, who walks and breathes and will leave the library soon to start a new life, she is real, but incomplete. A partial translation of who I was. I place the book in a box, seal it with packing tape, and write a simple label: Do not open. Then I place it on the highest shelf in the archive room, behind a row of outdated encyclopedias where no curious hand is likely to find it. As I leave the library, I notice something that makes me pause. Words on the dedication plaque by the entrance, words I've read 1,000 times before, seem different somehow. When I look directly at them, they appear normal. Millhaven Public Library, established. 1902. But when I glance from the corner of my eye, they shift and rearrange. Every library is a prison, every book a cell, every reader a willing captive. I shiver and hurry away, knowing that my sacrifice has changed me. I feel the absence of the part of myself left behind, but also a new awareness, a sense of all the stories around me, living and breathing in their bindings. I feel the invisible threads connecting readers to text, the delicate membranes between fiction and reality. Sometimes at night, I dream of the white void and feel the entity still raging against its new prison. My consciousness holds firm, wrapped around it like layers of silk, keeping it contained through sheer narrative will. In these dreams, my grandfather and the other former readers stand with me, our combined stories forming an unbreakable binding. During my waking hours, I find I can sense when someone picks up a book with particular intensity or purpose. I feel their connection to the words, the way meaning flows between page and mind. It's a bitter comfort, this new awareness. I am both more and less than I was. 6 months after what the town newspaper called the library incident, I've moved to a small apartment in the next town over. I work at a bookstore now, no longer a librarian, but still a guardian of stories. I'm careful never to read too deeply, never to lose myself completely in text. Matt and I have coffee sometimes. He doesn't ask about what really happened, and I don't offer explanations. Some stories are better left untold. One morning, I receive a package with no return address. Inside is a handwritten journal and a note from Professor Whitaker. Found this in the university archives. Thought you should have it. The journal belonged to Elizabeth Caldwell. In entries dating to the final months of her life, she describes the same phenomenon I experienced, but her solution was different. She didn't contain the entity. She merely passed the book on, allowing it to find my grandfather decades later. On the last page of Caldwell's journal, I find a new entry in fresh ink. You chose a different ending, Eleanor. You rewrote the rules. But no prison holds forever, and no story truly ends. I'll be waiting in the spaces between words. Turn around. I don't turn around. Instead, I burn Elizabeth's journal in my kitchen sink, watching the pages curl and blacken. As the final page turns to ash, I hear, or imagine I hear, the whisper of text rearranging itself somewhere behind me. Stories end, but their echoes remain. Words die, but meaning lingers. And sometimes, in the silence of a library after closing, In the rustle of pages turned by unseen hands, in the spaces between the lines of every book ever written, something waits. Something that knows your name. Something that's reading you right now.